Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Powerhouse Podcast. I am so delighted and honored with the guest that I have joining me today, who is going to come in the ring. We're going to go a few rounds, and we're going to really get into a space around how leadership is a choice, how it's all about how you choose to show up, how you choose to serve, and how you choose to take that personal responsibility. As always, you know, we never know where the conversation is going to go. This is an opportunity for us to go deep and get into those rich, juicy conversations that actually have a little bit of a power punch. So without further ado, let me just say hello and welcome to my fabulous guest, Julie Rosenberg. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Candy. Great to be here, and I can't wait to jump in the ring with you.
Awesome. Well, before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about this powerhouse and why I'm so absolutely thrilled that she has agreed to be a guest on the show. Julie Rosenberg is an MD and pharmaceutical executive and global healthcare leader who oversees drug development programs in service to patients with cancer. In addition, Dr. Rosenberg is an executive coach who helps successful leaders get even better by developing themselves, their people, and by embracing more conscious living. Julie has devoted the last 16 years to the in-depth study and practice of yoga and meditation. Her work demonstrates that the millennia-old physical, mental, and spiritual discipline of yoga not only supports good health and well-being, but also helps strengthen one's personal and professional leadership skills. Ooh, there's going to be stuff to dig into. In 2017, Julie was selected from among 16,000 applicants by #1 executive coach and leadership thinker, Dr. Goldsmith, as one of MG 100, a group of over 100 leading coaches, thinkers, and senior business leaders, each of whom is committed to paying it forward. Her book, Beyond the Map, has been called transformative, insightful, practical, accessible, creative, and so much more. And my dog is getting excited in the background, so apologies for the background noise. But Julie, welcome, and wow, what an incredible background you bring to the table.
Well, thanks, Candy. Again, it's great to be here. And, it's really a privilege for me to share a few thoughts with your listening audience and, to spend some time with you.
Excellent. Well, I'm curious right off the bat, as you know, we're digging into some of your background and we dig into the work that you're doing. I'm curious how you bridge the gap between pharmaceutical and global healthcare and the practices that you're doing to really be purposeful in terms of cancer care, and then bringing in the side of executive level leadership development and yoga and how those pieces all fit together.
Okay, that was a lot in one sentence. But let me say this. So one of the things that yoga teaches us, and the practice of yoga becomes critical for, is to be the observer. And another thing I'll say, just in light of your dog, is that yoga teaches us to drown out the background noise, to really be focused in the present, because life happens and we don't know what's going to happen, and that's just our reality. And so for me, I've worked with cancer patients and cancer survivors for the entirety of my career, and I'm privileged in the pharmaceutical industry to be developing drugs, as you said, for patients with cancer, but to also do that on an international scale. And honestly, I've become the observer of my own life and of the lives of others. And what I see so much, first of all, as I look at the lives of others, is that oftentimes there is a transformative event. And in this case, that event is illness. I'm serving patients with illness. 1 minute you're fine, the next minute you're not. And the reality is people at that time suddenly backpedal. They reflect, they wish, they hope, they wish they had lived, in a different way. Maybe they'd done something different and the like. And I really wanted to understand that better. And then as I was doing this work and observing that situation, I also observed my own life, because the stress of having a child, I have a son with autism, negotiating a family, and also working to ascend the corporate ladder in what my situation, which is a very male-dominated dominated, somewhat hierarchical situation. That situation was really difficult, and the stress really got the best of me. And I have to say, oftentimes I'd find myself angry and wanting more and thinking, I don't want to be in this situation. Maybe I should get out. And the idea of getting out was really what helped me stay in. Because at the end of the day, everything we do related to leadership is up to us. It's up to us to be grounded. It's up to us to take responsibility. It's up to us to analyze the situation. And it's up to us to do it in the here and now, and not when something happens that's going to make us do that. And so I'd say my premise of all of this is trying to put together the learnings that were really at my fingertips that so many people may not integrate. I took the opportunity to integrate them, to come up with a framework of optimal leading and living in modern times, which actually dates back to the wisdom of the Yoga Sutras. So that's kind of how it happened.
Yeah. And I mean, there's so much inside of all that, right? And I think first thing I want to highlight is the fact that, you're already talking about how leadership really is a choice, right? It's a choice in taking that personal responsibility to create the strategies and the framework. And I love that word around how you purposely get to show up. So it's not just waiting for whatever's going to happen in your life, but being prepared because life's constantly throwing things in the mix. And so I want to go back to something you said earlier as you were describing sort of where this premise came from and what's driving this work moving forward. And it was about how to really kind of drown out that noise or drown out some of that stuff that's going on in the background. And my dog is being quite exemplary of the example right now, which I'm not quite sure. And actually, I'm going to call for a pause for a minute. My team can edit this. Peyton, enough! Peyton Wrigley. My team's going to edit this out. So come here. No more. Lay down. We're done with the barking. No more. Hey, Peyton Wrigley, I will close that door. Hey, 1 second. Let me close that. He's barking at something outside. Get out. Get out of the room. No more. There you go. Okay, to my team, we can go ahead and pick back up. So talking about how you're drowning out some of that, those kind of ancillary things or those things that are outside, why is that so important when we talk about that in the frame of leadership?
Well, let's stay in the here and now, right here in our conversation. And so we've had a challenge with your dog, Peyton, barking, right? We have options, right? We can choose to get upset because the dog is barking. It can dissuade our entire conversation. It can put it in a different arena. We can choose to stop because there's noise in the background. We can't manage the noise. We can choose to stop. Or we can take a third path. We can either drown it out in terms of our own thinking, keep focused and disciplined, and try to press forward despite the noise. And this is just a metaphor, right? It's a metaphor in today's conversation, but in reality, this is what's essential in life because there's so much outside of us. The goal here for all of us is to lose the ego and to focus inside and to determine how do we lead ourselves and others despite the noise. And so our choice here, of course, Candy, has been to press on, right? And this is what I encourage people to do because the noise gets so many of us on so many occasions. We just succumb to the noise.
Yeah. And I mean, there's so much validity to that, right? I mean, there's a lot I work with, and for many of you listening, we talk a lot about how to destroy the noise. And there's noise that seems to be on a magnitude that's just, never like something we've never seen before. I mean, you look at the media, you look at what's going on politically, economically, you look at what's going on globally. And so I'm curious from your perspective, as you do this work, and you did talk about there's different options that we can go through. And yes, in this moment, we're choosing to push forward. But for someone who's really found themselves getting kind of inundated with the noise, and they've never really created that first step or that first strategy on how to redirect or how to change that pattern, what are some things you offer to people who are wanting to find ways to lead through the noise, yet maybe never have put that into practice before?
Well, one of the things that I think is so gratifying in yoga is the pranayama practice, which is the breath work. And the breath work a lot of times can lead one to pausing. And so in the moment, if we stop and take a few deep belly breaths, that might take just a moment, 15 seconds, right? Mm-hmm. We stop and we pause. That pause can actually stop some of our normal reactions that may not necessarily be the reactions that serve us. And so I think the pranayama practice, a variety of breathing techniques that are known well in yoga, lead to this ability to pause, and the pause also helps one to limit the noise. Yeah. So that probably is my favorite in the moment activity.
Well, and it's interesting because I love that you talk about the power of the pause, and it's a big thing that we talk about, and really talking about that the power of the pause gives you the space to lead, right? And so when you're not in that reactionary space and just breath work, and I know even from my own story, that was part of the rock bottom, was that upper neck, not letting breath move through my body, that just kind of shuts you down, exhausts you, and you're sort of like sucking in that kind of stressed breathing instead of really allowing yourself to be still and breathe that in. And so I have a question, because I know that some of our listeners play in the corporate space or play in big business. And, oftentimes the conversation comes up around, okay, yoga is kind of that woo-woo space and you want me to breathe, and that's great. And how do you address that bridge between what people want to use as maybe an excuse and cop out in terms of, this is so foreign to me, and that kind of connection into serving at a higher level and being able to play at their highest and best level?
Well, first and foremost, I guess I have a voice of credibility to the skeptics. I am strictly Western trained in medicine, and I work in a hierarchical corporate structure in service to patients. I work in the pharmaceutical industry, and our mission is very patient focused. We really want to develop new drugs that serve patients, but I'm in the mix. I'm not coming from an Eastern background. I'm not coming from a place of being a distant observer. I'm coming from a place of being there in the here and now. And then I'm coming from a medical place where I've seen people, as we talked about, in the brink of life and death, and I've really needed to observe. And so what I can share from my own experience and my experience in building international teams that get results is that this works. And no matter how skeptical people may be, having some structure in life is important. I think structure is underrated. And learning simple techniques to minimize your stress, because stress is killing us, right? These are stress related techniques that help to manage stress. And so if we look at it that way, from the standpoint of someone who's not coming from the Eastern space and who knows it's working and who's shown it working to teams, and of course I'm not unique, maybe there's some opportunity for the skeptics to think about, okay, maybe I could try it. And in my book, recognizing everybody's so busy, I don't take busyness as an excuse. I give all sorts of examples that people can do in 2 minutes to manage their lives more effectively. Literally, try this in 2 minutes. So, I think there's a variety of things, and many people are fearful and they're not self-aware. And again, I ask them to sit with this and think about, what do you have to lose?
Yeah. And I love that you just said that you can change things in 2 minutes. I think that's one of the biggest places that people cop out is, I don't have enough time. And I know that when we talk sometimes about the power of play, and I'll ask somebody, do they play every day? Because I think that's another piece you need to breathe into your life and be more present and show up. And they're like, I don't have time to play. And my response always is, do you have 3 to 5 minutes? You can push play on that favorite Disney song, or that song that you know that the minute you hear it, you can't help but feel uplifted and want to dance around and play in your office and whatever. And I think to your point around that, creating those little spaces, right? It's not about needing 30 minutes to do a yoga practice. It's about doing 2 minutes here and 2 minutes. We sit at a stoplight, and what are you doing with your breath? Or while you're waiting for someone for an appointment. And I think there's so much opportunity that most people have said, well, I don't have enough, I'm too busy. And we've created this whole culture that says there's not enough time. And so I love that you hit on the fact that it can be done as simple as, a couple seconds or a couple minutes that can redirect your energy, redirect how you're showing up, and be more purposeful.
Mm-hmm. And in addition, just to add to that, from a medical perspective, stress in and of itself isn't bad. We have stressors in our lives all the time. We have a hormonal, a brief shift, a surge of adrenaline and cortisol. If we have a limited stress, and then those things should go back to normal. But in all our busyness and all our running around, and we don't have time for anything, stress is now killing us because those hormones aren't going back to normal, and they're wreaking havoc on our bodies and on our minds, literally affecting every organ system and how we function. So we've got to manage our stress better, because chronic stress can lead to disease. Dis-ease and disease. And this is what I also really want people to avoid. So my mission, Candy, is really twofold. I really want to reframe how we think about well-being, and I want to help people lead themselves better in our challenging times.
I love that. And so I would love to dig into that a little bit more, because one of the things we like to do is, there's phrases or words that come out and people are like, yeah, I get that. But I love that you purposely said in your mission that you want to really bring a different meaning to the word well-being. So when you say well-being, what does that mean from your perspective?
Well, I think it's basically being an integrated, stable, and happy human being, and historically, when we thought about wellness, typically folks will remember we were talking mostly about diet and exercise, and there's guidelines for that, and there's guidelines for health screenings and some things we can do for prevention. And I have to say, we're not necessarily doing too well with diet and exercise in our sedentary society where we have so much overweight and obesity, but that's another hour conversation. But in terms of well-being, there's so many things that now have a science background that can lead us to be able to manage better in modern times. Yoga is one of them. The practice of yoga, of course, the full practice includes meditation and mindfulness and the breath work. It includes self-awareness. Insight and self-awareness are really key. The more we understand ourselves, our strengths and our limitations, really the better we can move through the world. It includes relationships. It includes the power of positive relationships, the power of community. Well-being to me includes gratitude practices and fostering compassion and kindness, and so many different things in modern times. Actually, this will be the subject of my next book, the redefinition of well-being. So I think it's multifactorial in modern times, but I don't want to lose sight of the gold standards, as we were saying earlier. We still need self-care, but the extension of self-care today is just way broader than diet and exercise.
It is. And so that leads me to two questions in what you just said. One is, how would someone know that they're integrated? I like that word, integrated. And so if someone's like, how do I measure and know that that things are integrated for me, that I'm in a space where I'm creating the right level of self-care, that I have established whatever well-being is supposed to be. So how do I even know how to set myself up to measure being successful in an integrated state? And the other piece around that I think it carries into that question is, talk about how that goes beyond the mat, right? It's not just about the yoga practice. It's about a much bigger game than that. And so I'm curious how that plays together.
Yeah, well, the first one in terms of an integrated life is, you have to have somewhat of a planful existence. And for me, the integrated life, quite frankly, starts with self-care. And one thing, I can say, as a mom to a son with special needs, as we mentioned, my son is autistic. As a mom to a son with special needs, what has been essential for me to raise my son well is for me to take care of myself first. And I hope that, if nothing else, your listeners, especially those who might have similar situations, will take that to heart, because you need to have a certain frame of wellness. So I think self-care is very key. The next thing is to really define your purpose and your passions. Why do you think you're here, and what really drives you? So try to define those things and look at the framework in terms of the work that you're doing. If you are employed outside the home, does that work bring you value and meaning? And even if that work, say, oh, I don't particularly like my job, I'm just doing this or this. Even if that work is generally satisfying, but it pays the bills and it allows you to do other things that bring passion and joy to your life, is that good enough, or do you need to change? And so the self-awareness is key. And then, it's important to look at your relationships. What is the quality of your relationships, and do they bring you the comfort, joy, and resolve that you're looking for, or are changes needed? And remember, as we've been talking about, you are the genesis of the change. So your own behavior, if it can change, it can actually have a great impact on others, and you may see them change too. And so the last thing I just want to touch on, is the support system. I find that the church, the synagogue, the community, in a variety of ways can really support people. And so what communities are you involved in, and how does the community serve you, and how do you serve the community? Because at the end of the day, we feel like we never have enough. But oftentimes, if we sit and reflect on these things, we do have enough, and we're here to serve. So how are you in service to others, and what are you doing in service to yourself?
Yeah. And it's a woven, thread that gets moved through a lot of different pieces and parts. And I think, you highlighting that and talking about it's so much beyond just us. And it's that opportunity to really define what success and a true return on investment is in any or in all of those areas, right? And looking at, how you spend your time and your energy and money, and the culture you're creating for other people and the community and your lifestyle and all of those things. We have the opportunity to put ourselves in the driver's seat to say, this is what's meaningful for me. This is what I feel joy is for me. This is fulfillment. This is where I feel as if I'm satisfied and I have enough, or I'm overflowing in that space. And so to put yourself in that driver's seat to say, I get to decide. I get to be the captain to say, this is the metric for me, because everyone's equation in terms of their own well-being is probably going to look slightly different. And we're going to have our own interpretation. And then how and where you connect it into something bigger than yourself, into your tribe, into community, into the way that you get to show up and serve. And so powerful, the way that you're threading that together and really weaving that into a much bigger matrix of who we are and how we get to add value in the world, and how we're taking care of ourselves in the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they're actually intimately related, and I think you really can't have one without the other.
Right. Right. And that's the space that it's always interesting to me when people say life work balance. I personally have a belief that that's not even possible. It's not about balance. It's more about harmony. And I think everything you're talking about is more around really understanding your own personal center and finding the harmonious kind of rhythm in that space that is you're restoring your own health and well-being, and being very mindful of that. And the practice that you talk about, yoga and meditation and some of the other pieces, that allows us to be in that space to really focus and get quiet in that space. And just really powerful. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and people don't have to do a very rigorous practice in a studio to get involved. And that's one thing, Western society, our view of yoga and meditation practices is often that we need to do this in a studio, and especially with the traditional asana practice, folks buy very fun clothing, and sometimes they're really costly, and we buy nice yoga mats and we run to the studio, and it can be a social event. But in reality, we can do these things in our homes. In my book, I give a number of things, yoga poses you can do at the desk, you can do in the airplane, and it helps with your flexibility, both of body and of mind. And it's the same thing with meditation. My goal is always meditation on the move. In other words, we talked about the pause. It's the same idea. When things are really rough, can you pause, if only for a few seconds, regroup, and maybe make a different choice?
Yeah. And I am such a big fan of yoga, breathing, and meditation on planes. It's usually where there's a lot of chaos, and I find ways, whether it be with music apps, whatever, that allow me to just go really into some guided meditations. I'm in a safe space. I'm not going anywhere. So I love the idea of being able to bring that in. And, I think people get stuck where they think yoga has to look a certain way, and meditating, same thing. And I know I've talked to people, I said, I do walking meditations at time where my dog knows where we're going and I can connect into nature and I can allow myself to go deeper within. Because I know the path we're on and I know where we're at. And for me, that there's movement sometimes that's required for me to go internal. And I think letting people know that you don't have to have a one size fits all. It's the same thing I share with people when they're journaling. They're like, so am I supposed to write Dear Diary? I'm like, there's no rules. You open up and maybe you want to color. Maybe you want something that's more structured. Maybe you want, it's more around connecting into that space, however it calls to you, however it speaks to you. And I think that's another potential area where people let their own noise get in the way because they think it has to be a certain way and just like this, instead of just allowing themselves to let it be whatever it's going to be.
Right. I agree with that. And also, I should say, I agree with your premise of there really isn't a work-life balance. I think in modern times, people are called on seemingly 24/7 with all of our advances in technology. And at some point, we need to learn boundaries around that. And we need to learn just how to integrate our work and our life. And sometimes I think, I work all the time. But in essence, I always maybe do a little bit of work integrated into the variety of other things I do in my life. And sometimes, I'll take a moment, you were mentioning journaling, and just, I'll see something that resonates for me and, that's going to be an article or that's going to be a blog. And I think, for people, of course, not everybody's into that kind of thing, but for people in general, not trying to fight it and have say, I've got a 5-day-a-week work week. I've got 2 days on the weekend. They want all my time on the weekend and this and that. Just trying to sit with it and figure out, okay, how do I create the right boundaries, but accept that I'm in modern times and I need a modern framework.
Yeah. And boundaries is a big conversation we have. We talk about how to say yes and no as complete sentences, along with thank you, and knowing when to use those terms, right? And the boundaries is, in my opinion, everything that's required in order to create the framework for self-care. Without boundaries, there is no wellness, there's no well-being, because you're constantly depleting. And we had a conversation, I had a 3-day last week. And it was interesting because people were like, I just give and I give and I give. And it was one of those kind of like downloads that came in and said, if you find yourself giving all the time without receiving, know that you're only depleting. And we don't realize that what we think is giving is actually depleting ourselves because we're not taking that time to replenish and to reconnect and to rest. And so I love that you talked about boundaries, because and that may be my personal belief, but believe that there is no well-being, there is no sense of self-care without boundaries. I don't believe the other is possible.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that for sure. I mean, and there's so many things to think about, right? I don't want people to necessarily be overwhelmed, but I think, if you just reflect on your life, where the challenges are, where are the opportunities, what's my purpose, what's my passion, and how am I living, and what if the next day was my last?
Right.
How would I really want to live today in this moment? Don't worry about the past, but stay in the present. What would I want to do now? And try to frame a way to do it, because everybody has, the bucket list, and they have the past regrets, and they have the future worries, and living in the present just gives us so much more opportunity, and we all ought to live in the now and not worry so much about what is or what was.
Right. Completely agree. And so I know there's people that are really resonating with this message and, wanting to understand more, maybe how they can bring some of these practices, some of these strategies into their life. So Julie, what's the best way for people to find out more about the work you're doing, get in touch with you, and continue this conversation?
So first, the book that we've been talking about, Candy, is Beyond the Mat: Achieve Focus, Presence, and Enlightened Leadership Through the Principles and Practice of Yoga. It's widely available in all bookstores and, of course, can be obtained anywhere online. Many folks are just picking up a copy on Amazon. And it's a paperback, but it's also available as an audiobook and as an ebook. So, it's available pretty much to anyone. And my website is www.julierosenbergmd.com, JulieRosenbergMD.com. And I have a variety of things that people can obtain for free. I do a lot of posting on social media, so connect with me there. They can download a chapter from my book on the website, free on meditation. And I do a newsletter once or twice a month. And that newsletter is always related in some way to the various things that we've chatted about today. It's about personal leadership and well-being on some level. And I try to bring in, a variety of new things. So hopefully your listeners will take advantage of those things.
Absolutely. And we're going to have all that available for you in the show notes so that you do make sure that you can take advantage of either Julie's book, Beyond the Mat, or go see what she's doing on her website, julierosenbergmd.com. Highly encourage you to reach out and learn more about what this amazing woman is doing, how she's showing up and how she's serving others, and how you can use some of those strategies to do the same yourself. And so, Julie, as we're closing out our time here, it's been absolutely just amazing getting to know you. Curious if there was one last thing you'd like to share with this audience, if there's something you'd like to leave them with, what might that be?
Well, I think it's really my message as a physician is often about health. And I think that what I'd like to see people do is take ownership of their health. We have been talking so much about the personal responsibility of leadership. There is a personal responsibility that we need to have for our health and well-being. And I challenge your listeners to just do one thing different in the next 24 hours to better take care of themselves and to take ownership of their health. And I bet most folks will feel better, and I'd love to hear about it.
Excellent. I love that. You know that we love anything that says say yes to yourself. And as always, taking that ownership, taking that responsibility starts with you. And so what is the one thing? Here is your challenge, all of you listeners. What is the one thing you're going to do to take responsibility and be more purposeful in your own health and well-being? It is time for you to say yes to yourself and destroy the noise that might be getting in the way. Once again, thank you to my just absolutely delightful and amazing guest, Julie Rosenberg, for joining us on the show. Cannot thank her enough for her amazing insight and just the conversation that we had. And for all of you listening, as always, thank you for tuning in. Look forward to having more of these conversations to serve you, because as we mentioned in the beginning, leadership is all about how you choose to show up, how you choose to serve others, and how you choose to take personal responsibility inside that space. And that includes your own health and wellness. With that, this is Candy. I am sending you all huge heart-to-heart hugs. Know that I love you. Keep dialing in. Subscribe if you aren't already subscribed, and we will catch you on the next episode of the Powerhouse podcast.